Donkey Heads in the Jerusalem Temple, a descent into the sacredly bizarre. Welcome back. My name is Hudson Gray. Today, we look at instances where some strange anthropomorphic items were found in places they shouldn't be. It's one of those strange footnotes in history that you're not supposed to ask too many questions about. A Roman soldier walks into the Second Temple in Jerusalem, sword drawn, expecting treasure, relics, maybe a few revolutionary scrolls. But, according to a handful of Roman writers, what he finds is something very different, something unsettling. A severed donkey's head, enshrined like an object of worship. The accusation appears as early as the 1st century BCE, but it really takes off with Apion, an Egyptian Greek grammarian who claimed that Jews worshipped a donkey-headed idol hidden in the inner sanctum of their temple. He wasn't alone. Tacitus, yes, that Tacitus, echoed the claim, writing that during the Roman sacking of the temple, a golden donkey's head was discovered, supposedly the object of Jewish reverence. Even in the ruins of Pompeii, graffiti was found, mocking Jews as donkey worshippers. The official Jewish response came from Josephus, who wrote a full-throated rebuttal in against Apion. He called it slander, Roman propaganda designed to dehumanize a people Rome could neither control nor fully understand. And he's probably right, at least in part. But here's the problem. The story keeps coming back. The idea that someone at some point placed a donkey head in the holiest site in Jerusalem doesn't just come from one source. It's a persistent thread in Roman literature, repeated often enough to suggest that something was seen, something that triggered disgust and maybe a little fear. Now, this is where most historians tap out. They chalk it up to anti-Semitic fantasy, a smear campaign, the ancient version of blood libel. But there's another possibility. In ancient Egypt, the donkey was more than just a beast of burden. It was the sacred animal of Seth, god of deserts, chaos, foreign lands, and violence. Seth wasn't just feared. He was eventually exiled from Egypt's official pantheon. Pharaohs erased his name. His shrines were defaced. But the cult of Seth didn't die. It went underground. And what's fascinating is that Seth's decline in Egypt coincides eerily with the Hellenistic period, when Jewish communities were deeply entangled with Greek and Egyptian culture, especially in cities like Alexandria, where the line between theology and politics was constantly shifting. So here's a theory, a real one, not just ancient gossip. What if the donkey head wasn't some baseless insult, but a misidentified relic? What if there was a fringe sect, perhaps a splinter cult operating under the radar, that had preserved Setian iconography in secrecy? To the Romans, it would have looked grotesque, heretical, proof of barbarism. But to someone schooled in older, darker rituals, it would have been a relic of something much older than Judaism or Rome. A memory of the desert god who refused to die. When Seth was finally cast out of the Egyptian divine order, it wasn't a clean break. You don't just erase a god who was once powerful enough to defend Ra himself. You bury him beneath layers of symbols, allegories, and hostile reinterpretations. By the New Kingdom period, Seth had gone from a necessary god of balance who battled chaos on behalf of the cosmos to a hated symbol of disruption, foreignness, and betrayal. After all, he murdered Osiris, disrupted the natural order, and dared to challenge Horus in open court. Pharaohs with Seth's name were suddenly rebranded. Some literally had their cartouches chiseled off the walls. His temples were abandoned, his statues defaced. But something strange happened. While mainstream Egypt erased Seth, the fringes kept him alive. In Ombos, one of Set's ancient cult centers, veneration persisted quietly. And outside Egypt, in Greco-Egyptian mystery cults, syncretic sects, and among exiled priestly castes, Set was remembered not just as a god of chaos, but as a god of knowledge, rebellion, and transformation. In some circles, he was even identified with Typhon, the monstrous force of destruction in Greek myth. And here's where it gets really strange. The timeline overlaps with the rise of early monotheism. As Jewish communities settled in Egypt and later spread throughout the Mediterranean, ideas cross-pollinated. Alexandria became a melting pot of theology and myth. And within this ferment, underground movements started blending iconography, rituals, even divine names. There's an ancient tradition, rarely discussed, but occasionally hinted at in esoteric texts, that suggests some fringe groups began reclaiming Set as a misunderstood force, not evil, but necessary. The god who endured exile, resisted celestial order, and challenged divine tyranny. The Lucifer of the Nile, if you will. If you were part of such a group, where would you hide your sacred object? How would you preserve your faith in a world that called your god a villain? Perhaps by placing it inside the most unexpected place of all, the enemy's temple. If you think that sounds far-fetched, remember that the Second Temple was not a monolith. It was a political, religious, and economic battlefield. Zealots, Sadducees, Essenes, Hellenized Jews, and foreign agents all vied for control of its meaning and ritual. A donkey head placed deep inside could have been a planted relic meant to discredit, a coded symbol worshipped by an underground sect, or a ritual object, part of a ceremony no longer understood. And we know, historically, that animal heads and effigies were used in Egyptian rites. The red donkey, specifically, was a sacrificial substitute for Set himself, slain, buried, or burned to banish chaos. So, when Roman soldiers reported seeing a donkey head, what did they actually find? An idol? A decoy? A preserved sacrificial totem? Or perhaps a message meant for those who still remembered the old gods? As Christianity emerged from the shadows of Judaism and the ruins of the Roman Empire, it didn't rise in a vacuum. It absorbed and repurposed. It borrowed symbols, redefined them, and turned the ancient world's gods into devils. And right there, lurking in the shadows of early Christian polemic, the donkey shows up again. The earliest Roman caricatures of Jesus, like the Alexamenos graffito, depict him with a donkey's head, crucified. Scholars interpret this as mockery, a crude attempt to paint Christians as fools worshipping a braying beast. But consider this. Why not use a pig or a dog? Why a donkey? Because even Rome still feared what the donkey represented. In the Roman mind, the donkey had become a symbol of Eastern subversion, of strange cults, obscure gods, and rituals that defied imperial control. And for those who understood the deeper roots, the donkey wasn't just an insult. It was a trace memory of Set, the ancient god Rome never quite managed to name, but whose influence they suspected in every heresy and rebellion. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the image of Set had fully morphed. In Gnostic texts, the god of this world, the demiurge, is often described as arrogant, flawed, and animal-headed. Not outright evil, but deceptive, a false god pretending to be the true one. Sound familiar? In some strands of early Christian Gnosticism, Set is reborn not as a god, but as a force behind the curtain, a spirit of confusion mistaken for divine truth. And as the centuries passed, this image began to congeal into something even more familiar: the devil, horns, hooves, a hybrid of beast and man. Not a goat, as we're told today, that came later, but a creature with long ears, a snout, and a grin that mocks the order of heaven. Even the Baphomet, first drawn centuries later during the Inquisition, echoes the same unsettling fusion of animal and human, sacred and profane, a symbol of knowledge, rebellion, and inversion. And that, perhaps, is the final twist. What if the donkey head was never meant to be seen? What if it was a temple secret, tucked away for initiates of a forgotten rite? A symbol not of foolishness, but of forbidden wisdom, kept alive by those who remembered Egypt's older gods and smuggled their legacy into the very heart of Western religion? Because history isn't clean. It doesn't burn its past, it recycles it. Old gods become demons, demons become metaphors, and in some dark corner of a temple wall, behind veils of incense and centuries of interpretation, a donkey still waits. Not for worship, but for recognition. Thank you for tuning in to this strange and unsettling deep dive. This has been your host and researcher, Hudson Gray. Until next time.